Kate, the Future Queen by Kate Nicholl. Preface. When Catherine Elizabeth Middleton married Prince William, the future King of the United Kingdom, a new chapter of royal history was written. Kate, as she is best known, was the first commoner to marry into the royal family since the 17th century. Since her arrival, she has revitalized the British monarchy, whose members in turn have enjoyed a resurgence of popularity they feared might never occur following the death of Diana, the Princess of Wales, in 1997. Now we have Kate. On July 22, 2013, at 4:24 p.m., she delivered a son, Prince George Alexander Louis of Cambridge, an heir and future king. She has, both metaphorically and literally, breathed new life into the British monarchy, producing the first Prince of Cambridge for over a century, and securing the lineage of the House of Windsor. Great Britain now has 3 generations of heirs awaiting the throne for the first time since Queen Victoria's reign, 150 years ago. Royal Constitution dictates that King Charles and possibly Queen Camilla will reign before King William V and Queen Catherine, but it is most likely that it will be Kate and William who will continue to drive and revitalize the monarchy over the coming years. While Diana reignited the royal family, she also rocked the royal institution to its core. Kate, however, has taken to her role seamlessly, embracing the royal rule-book. She is adored by the Queen and has won the admiration of the rest of the family. Now the world will wait to see how she and William raise their firstborn. Those close to the couple believe it will be with a hands-on approach, with as little stuffiness as possible. Although this child will always be His Royal Highness, destined to rule and be raised in palaces, Kate, along with her close-knit loving family, will enrich this future monarch's life considerably. For the very first time, the direct heir to the throne has middle and working-class blood coursing through his veins. With his mother's ancestry rooted in the mines of Durham and the textile mills of Leeds, this is a prince descended from coal miners as well as kings and queens. Kate is a middle-class girl, one of the people. She is truly a people's princess. Certainly, since her and William's fairy tale romance and now the birth of their first baby, Kate has enchanted her future subjects. She is that iconic British girl from the home counties who got her prince and is now the mother of the future king. This is the story of a young woman who now calls Kensington Palace home and is reshaping the future of the world's most famous royal family. This is the story of Kate, the future queen. Chapter 1. Once upon a time. As she listened to the silence across the white snow-carpeted fields outside her window, Carol Middleton began to feel uneasy. On the radio, the Met Office was issuing a severe weather warning, and she knew that one more heavy snowfall would mean that her village would be cut off. Inside, the log fire offered warmth and some comfort, but Carol, who had been in the first stages of labor since the early hours, decided she had waited long enough to make the call. Her husband, Michael, a flight dispatcher with British Airways, was working shifts at the airport, a 40-minute drive away, and had asked Carol to call him as soon as the contraction started. Not knowing how they would feel and aware that first babies can take their time to arrive, Carol had held off speaking to him until she was sure that the pains were not false alarms. She had called the local GP, who put her mind at rest by reassuring her that he would send an air ambulance if Michael wasn't back in time to drive her to the labor ward. Carol wasn't quite sure if he was joking. Carol's friend and neighbor, a woman who was known to everyone in the village as George Brown, who was also due to give birth that same week, remembered the morning well. It was a bitterly cold winter, there was lots of snow, and we were both worried we would not make it to the Royal Berkshire Hospital because the snow was so heavy. Carol was really very concerned, but the doctor said he would get a helicopter to land in the field if need be. In the event, Carol and Michael did get through the snow and to the hospital in time, and their baby, Catherine Elizabeth Middleton, known today as Kate, was born on January 9, 1982. The birth went smoothly. Carol delivered her firstborn naturally, recovered well, and was home within several days, with her precious newborn daughter. "I saw Carol a week later," recalled Mrs. Brown. "She had had an easy and natural birth, which didn't surprise me. Carol was fit and competent from the word go. She seemed to take to motherhood amazingly well, and when I went round to see her, she was happily breastfeeding and seemed to know exactly what she was doing. Catherine was a lovely little baby, cherubic and chubby-cheeked and so good. I remember she didn't cry much at all. I think that was probably because Carol was so relaxed. She had always wanted to be a mother, and shortly after she found out she was pregnant, Carol, a flight attendant for British Airways, decided to leave her job. Although she loved her career, she knew that globe-trotting, working shifts, and spending days and nights abroad were not conducive to raising a family. So it was with some sadness that she gave up work, as she had dreamed of being a flight attendant since she was a schoolgirl. A university education had not been an option for her because there was simply not enough money, and no one in her family had ever gone on to further their education. After leaving school at 16 and working for a while in the clothing store C&A, Carol enrolled in a training program with British Airways. It was 1974, and air travel was still a novelty. The majority of the British public had never even been on a plane, and being a flight attendant was seen as prestigious and glamorous. Working for a high-profile airline such as British Airways was a feather in Carol's cap. Slim and pretty, she cut an elegant figure in her tailored blue jacket and skirt, red cravat, and smart pillbox hat, a uniform that she wore with great pride. Carol was excited about the prospect of jetting around the world. Coming as she did from a modest background, family holidays were always spent in Britain on the south coast or walking in the countryside, and so the prospect of a job flying to exotic corners of the globe was wonderfully tantalizing. Her younger brother, Gary Goldsmith, recalled how she would practice flight announcements to perfect her technique. "I remember her training," he told the Mail on Sunday. "She used to practice doing her announcements on a tape recorder, much to my amusement." When Carol qualified, her parents, Ron and Dorothy Goldsmith, were over the moon, according to Gary. At school, she had worked hard to pass her exams, and now she was truly making something of her life. According to Jean Harrison, Dorothy's cousin, when Carol became an air hostess, Ron and Dorothy were thrilled. "It was a big job. I worked for British Airways at the same time Carol was there, but I was on the computer side. It was a big, exciting business to work for and a very respectable role." The only daughter of Ron Goldsmith, a painter and decorator from Southall, and Dorothy Harrison, a shopkeeper from Hettonlehole, a Durham coal mining town, Carol came from humble roots. She had her parents to thank for the fact that she was given a decent education and a loving family home. Their upbringing had not been nearly as comfortable as hers. Dorothy, Kate's maternal grandmother, was born into abject poverty. She was the daughter of Thomas Harrison and Elizabeth Temple. Thomas grew up in northeast England, close to the historic town of Durham, where his father and several generations before him had been coal miners. One of 6 siblings, Thomas was just 14 years old when his father, John Harrison, was killed during World War I, a few weeks before the armistice. The loss of her husband and the brutality of coal mining impelled Thomas's mother, Jane, to try to carve out a different path for her son, and she apprenticed him to her carpenter father, determined that at least one of her children would learn a trade. It turned out that she was tremendously forward-thinking, for during the Depression of the late 1920s, as the demand for coal decreased, the industrial areas of the northeast were badly hit and mining no longer offered the job security it had for so many previous generations in Thomas's family. Fortunately, there was a construction boom after the war, and tradesmen were in great demand. Thomas was therefore able to put his carpentry skills to use and spent the interwar years working in different parts of the northeast. It was while living in Easington Lane, a village near his mother, that he met Elizabeth Temple, the daughter of a farm worker. She already had a daughter, Ruth, scandalously born out of wedlock, a sweet child who Thomas took to at once. Kate's great-grandparents, Thomas and Elizabeth, married in 1934 and moved back to his home village of Hetton-le-Hole. A year later Elizabeth gave birth to her second daughter, Dorothy, and life passed by uneventfully until the outbreak of World War II, when Thomas was called up to fight. Unlike his father, Thomas survived the war, and on his return, fearing that there wouldn't be enough work in the north of the country, he moved his family down to Southall on the outskirts of London, where he hoped to find enough employment to support his family. Life post-war was tougher than Thomas had ever experienced. He found it hard to make ends meet and was forced to live in a dilapidated house in Bankside at the edge of the Grand Union Canal. Elizabeth contributed as much as she could, raising chickens and growing vegetables on a small farm nearby, but Ruth and Dorothy often had to go without. Despite their poverty, the two parents worked extremely hard, and Dorothy came to admire them and appreciate the values they instilled in her. As she grew into adolescence, she turned out to be a feisty girl with a steely determination to achieve. She dressed well and went out to earn money as soon as she was able, finding work as a sales assistant in local shops. It was while working in a branch of Dorothy Perkins that the teenage Dorothy met a young man named Ronald Goldsmith at the wedding of a mutual friend and fell head over heels in love. Jean Harrison recalled, Dorothy had met Ron when she was just 16. She used me as an excuse to go to a dance so that she could meet him again, and they started courting. Ron was a very nice and easygoing person. He would always say hello and stop for a chat whenever I saw him. At the time, Ronald Goldsmith, Kate's maternal grandfather, was working for his brother-in-law's haulage company, though his real love lay on the more creative side, in painting, baking, and making things. Ron was a kind, gentle man, liked by all who knew him, and, much like Dorothy, he had come up the hard way. His father, Stephen Charles, known as Charlie, worked as a construction laborer and, later, in a factory. Although he had managed to survive World War I, he died in 1938 of acute bronchitis at only 53, leaving Ron's mother, Edith, with their 6 children. Fortunately, by this time 4 of the children were of working age, but Ron and his sister Joyce were still youngsters and needed a roof over their heads. Edith was penniless, so when Charlie died she had no choice but to move to a condemned apartment on Dudley Street, Southall. She took a job working on the production line in the local Tickler factory, which manufactured jams and jellies, but the wages never lifted her above the poverty line. Her older children helped look after Ron and Joyce, but even so, life was relentlessly harsh and food had to be stretched and shared in order to feed the ever-expanding family of brothers and sisters-in-law. When the going got really tough, the ever-resourceful, razor-sharp Edith resorted to pawning various items in order to raise money to feed her younger children. Ron was very close to his mother, and the whole family stayed within a few streets of each other throughout World War II, which was a great support through the hard times. At 17, just after the war had ended, Ron got his call up for national service and was sent to Aqaba in Jordan, where he worked as a baker, a skill that stayed with him for life. He returned a year later and went to work for his brother-in-law's haulage company. After a few years spent courting Dorothy, he proposed, and they were married on August 8, 1953, at the Holy Trinity Church in Southall. The wedding of Kate's grandparents was traditional and simple. The bride wore an Elizabethan-style lace gown with a taffeta underskirt and an embroidered veil pinned to her hair with orange blossoms. According to Jean Harrison, who attended the ceremony, they were married when Dorothy was 18. She was very young, but she knew Ron was the man she wanted, and that was that. The wedding was lovely, and they held the reception at the Hambra Tavern, which was the pub at the top of the road. To begin with, the couple moved into Edith's tiny apartment on Dudley Road, a stone's throw from the busy Uxbridge Road. But it wasn't long before Dorothy, or Lady Dorothy as Edith and her family referred to her, called on her quiet ambition and moved them out to a nearby council house. Over the next few years, with a lot of careful saving and some help from Ron's extended family, Dorothy and Ron were able to afford a deposit on a house of their own and moved to a small house on Ullington Road, to the north of Southall. By this time, they were proud parents of a daughter, Carol, and while Ron worked hard, taking evening classes to hone his skills, Dorothy took part-time jobs that she could work around motherhood. "We used to go and see Ron and Dorothy a lot when Carol was a baby," recalled Jean Harrison. Dorothy was a very good mother, and very proud of her baby. She stopped working when Carol was born, but she went back to work once she could. She got a job at a jeweler on Hounslow High Street. I lived nearby, so I would often pop in to see her. She didn't work full-time, but she wanted to get back to work. Money was sparse in the early years, and she and Ron weren't well off. Dorothy liked nice things, she always did as a little girl. Dorothy spent hours walking Carol around in a Silver Cross baby carriage, the same upscale brand used by the royal family, which she and Ron had been saving forever since she got pregnant. It took some years before another baby graced the prized carriage, for it was not until 11 years later that Dorothy and Ron were blessed with another child. They had been trying for a baby for some time and were overjoyed when Gary arrived. "There was a big age difference between Carol and Gary," said Jean Harrison. "It's quite possible Dorothy miscarried, but things like that weren't talked about in those days." Ron and Dorothy were very old-fashioned people. With their family now complete, the Goldsmiths were happily married and earning decent money, and they invested everything in their children. By the late 1960s, Ron and Dorothy had saved enough money to move to a larger house on Kingsbridge Road in Norwood Green, a newly built semi-detached house with 3 bedrooms. At this point, Ron decided to leave the haulage firm and set up as a builder. He had always loved working with his hands, and he was talented, having once made a violin for Dorothy from scratch. Dorothy supported his career change. She believed he had the vision and ability to make a success of going it alone. It was a vision that his children had also inherited. Carol was a hard worker, and like both of her parents, she was determined to do well in life. It was at British Airways that she met Michael Middleton, a handsome flight dispatcher who had one of the best paid and most important management jobs at the airport, the same rank as captain, though confined to the ground. At Heathrow, Michael was responsible for coordinating British Airways arrivals and departures, managing flight schedules, and occasionally handling passenger and cargo-related matters. In his Navy uniform and red cap, the well-spoken and always immaculately turned out Michael was considered quite a catch among the coterie of air hostesses. But it was Carol who caught his eye. Eventually, he plucked up the courage to ask her on a date, and within a matter of months, they were in a serious relationship. Carol, who had never had a long-term boyfriend before, found Michael charming, thoughtful, and fun. Jean Harrison recalled that it was love at first sight, just as it had been for Ron and Dorothy. Perhaps it is something in the Harrison bloodline. Dorothy's mother, Elizabeth, who we called Auntie Lily, had a long marriage and lots of children. Dorothy fell in love and married her sweetheart, and so did Carol. Carol's job often took her overseas, so in order to make the most of the time she was in the country, she and Michael decided to move in together. They rented an apartment in Slough, a sprawling industrial town 22 miles from central London and conveniently close to Heathrow Airport. They lived there quite happily for several years, and before long they were engaged to be married. "I remember Carol coming in and showing off her ring," recalled one of her oldest friends, Martin Fiddler, who runs the Bladebone Butchery in the village of Chapel Row in Berkshire. Carol, like many of the airport industry, was living nearby, and my wife, Sue, and I got to know her well as she often dropped in. She was always smiling and happy, and there was just something lovely and fresh about her. She used to leave a scent of perfume in the shop. She was always chatty, bubbly, and lots of fun. She was delighted to be engaged, and I remember one day she brought Mike in and introduced him. She was a stunning lady, and they were a great couple, a really good mixture. Michael and Carol were married the following year, on June 21, 1980, at the parish chapel of St. James the Less in the village of Dorney in Buckinghamshire, 2 years to the day before Prince William was born. Ron and Dorothy contributed to the wedding, but the amount they gave was a fraction of the total cost, because the Middletons were in a different league. Kate's father, Michael, was comfortably middle class and well off, having had a very different start in life than his bride. His family had the security that money can afford, and like his father and his grandfather, he was fortunate enough to have gone to a private school, receiving a good education and the attendant privileges of boarding school. Michael also had all the benefits of being part of a close family. Peter, his father, and Anthony, his uncle, had married twin sisters and had 4 children each, and the 8 cousins lived on neighbouring streets in the well-to-do Roundhay district in Leeds, where they grew up together. Michael was proud of his father, an airline pilot and flying instructor, and was deeply appreciative of his mother, Valerie, who had spent part of her childhood in Marseilles and had stayed at home to bring up her 4 sons. Michael's forebears were wealthy. His mother's father, Frederick Glassborough, worked in a bank, and his paternal grandparents, Olive Lupton and Noel Middleton, were the descendants of 2 of the most prosperous families in Leeds. Noel, Kate's great-grandfather, came from a line of famous and successful Leeds solicitors and received an inheritance following the death of his father, John Middleton, that was worth the equivalent of close to $4 million. Noel's wife, Olive Lupton, Kate's great-grandmother, descended from a long line of wealthy Yorkshire wool merchants, and her lineage was equally impressive. An Edwardian society beauty, she had a number of illustrious family members through marriage, including the children's writers Arthur Ransom and Beatrix Potter, and she could trace her lineage way back to Sir Thomas Fairfax, an attendant at the Tudor court and a parliamentarian general in the English Civil War. It is through Sir Thomas Fairfax that the Middleton family can, in fact, trace their lineage to royalty. Olive's grandfather, Frank Lupton, a forward-thinking man, had expanded the family cloth business by buying an old mill and a finishing plant, thereby enabling his clothing merchants to own all parts of the production process. Philanthropic by nature, he gave back some of his wealth by helping to clear the slums of Leeds. His contribution was recognized by the town council, which named 2 streets after him. Frank was able to send his sons to public school, and as a result of his fine education, Olive's father, Francis, attended Cambridge University. Tragically, all 3 of Olive's brothers were killed in World War I, decimating her family, but it was of some relief that her mother had not lived to know of their senseless deaths. Olive and her sister inherited the family wealth on the death of their father and became enormously wealthy, with a personal fortune that amounted to the equivalent of nearly $15 million today. The trust fund Francis established was set up to ensure the stability of his descendants, and the trustees were instructed to pay the beneficiaries and fund the education of their children. When Olive died, she left behind an estate worth the equivalent of $13 million, to be divided among her 4 children. That meant Michael's father was a very wealthy man indeed. According to members of the Harrison family, Dorothy was delighted that Carol had not only fallen in love, but was marrying into money. On her wedding day, Carol had arrived at the church with her father in a horse-drawn carriage. She had 4 bridesmaids and wore a beautiful white gown, and she had asked her brother, Gary, who was 15 at the time, to be an usher. Unlike Ron and Dorothy's wedding reception at the local pub in 1953, Carol and Michael celebrated their wedding day in June 1980 in considerably more style with a sit-down luncheon at the exclusive Dorney Court, a Grade 1 listed Tudor manor house near Windsor in Berkshire. Unlike the Hambra Tavern, which was on a busy main road, Dorney Court was set in the middle of the countryside with beautiful views of the surrounding fields and the River Thames. It was quite a step up from Southall. Guests were asked to wear dresses and lounge suits, and at the champagne reception, canapés were served from silver platters. Carol's brother, Gary, recalled, "It was a real departure for our family, and everything my mother could have wished for. It was natural, informal, and classy, but it wasn't pretentious or ostentatious." The party continued after the reception at Michael's brother Simon's house for homemade chili, drinks, and dancing. Michael's family was close and welcoming. That was one of the things that had immediately drawn Carol to him. Both Michael and Carol wanted a family of their own, and at 25, Carol felt ready. Shortly before their wedding, they had begun house hunting in the nearby Royal County of Berkshire. Carol loved its picturesque villages, among them Bradfield, a sleepy rural hamlet surrounded by beautiful English countryside and offering a charming central green where there was an annual summer fete and, above all, a friendly community. According to their friend Dudley Singleton, a real estate agent who has known the couple for more than 30 years, they immediately fell in love with West View, a pretty red brick semi-detached cottage on Cock Lane, a winding country way just a short distance from the village. The house had 4 bedrooms, a pretty country kitchen with an Argo range, and a sitting room and dining room, each with working fireplaces. It was exactly what they were looking for, and they were delighted when their offer was accepted. According to Mr. Singleton, they moved to West View to start a family, and Bradfield is a pretty desirable spot to live. Theirs was a modest country cottage and they did some nice things to it. It was a very comfortable home with plenty of character. Carol made it very pretty. She has a lot of style and arranges things very nicely. It was intrinsically pretty, with lovely sash windows and open log fires in the 2 reception rooms. When they moved in, they didn't have oodles of money, but Carol made it look great. She has a great eye for color and fabrics. She was always a very stylish woman and very traditional. In the spring of 1981, Carol found out she was pregnant. The baby, due in early January, was to be Ron and Dorothy's first grandchild, and they were, as were Michael's parents, ecstatic. As her pregnancy progressed smoothly, the Middletons enjoyed the summer, joining with the rest of the country in celebrating the marriage of the Prince of Wales and the shy and enchanting Lady Diana Spencer. Carol, who came from a family of complete royalists, according to her brother, and Michael were among the 750 million people worldwide who watched the wedding on their televisions. Diana, in her beautiful bridal gown with its 25-foot-long train, was the epitome of a fairy tale princess, and the wedding of the future King of England at St. Paul's Cathedral in central London was a cause for celebration. Now that she was expecting a baby, Carol decided it was the right time to leave British Airways. By a stroke of luck, The company was axing jobs at the time and she was offered a $7,000 redundancy package, enough money to put toward her planned loft conversion and kitchen expansion. George Brown remembered that the original kitchen was small, and Carol, who was an accomplished cook and an enthusiastic baker, was grateful for the extra space once the work was done. Carol made the house a home. She had given up working as an air hostess, but Mike was still working at the airport, and I remember by then he had had enough. He didn't like it much. With a baby on the way, a mortgage to pay off, and only one salary, Michael took his position as the only breadwinner very seriously. Although he came from a wealthy family, the major part of his inheritance was tied up in the family trust fund, which was intended for their future children's education. As soon as Kate was born, they were determined to provide their daughter with the best of everything. They purchased a brand new silver cross baby carriage, just as Carol's mother had years before, and in the spring they started to plan a christening. There were 2 churches in the village, but both Carol and Michael preferred the more traditional St. Andrew's Church of England in the old part of Bradfield, which overlooked the River Pang. Kate was christened on June 20, 1982, and Carol and Michael proudly posed for pictures outside the church in the summer sunshine, holding Kate, who was dressed in a full-length traditional christening gown. Although they weren't regular churchgoers, it was important to the Middletons that their daughter be baptized, and after the ceremony they hosted a party at Westview. They had become friendly with their next-door neighbors David and Kirsty Philpott. Mrs. Philpott was the church treasurer and helped them organize the service. The christening was a big occasion, recalled George Brown. Carol did all the catering herself, from the sandwiches to the cakes, which she baked, and I remember she had lots of chilled champagne. All the grandparents were there, and it was a very happy occasion. The following day, June 21st, Prince William was born, and thousands of people gathered outside Buckingham Palace to wait for the announcement to be displayed at the wrought iron gates. Within a year of Kate's birth, Carol was pregnant again, and on September 6, 1983, Philippa Charlotte Middleton was born at the same hospital as her older sister. The following March, Pippa, as she was known to the family, was also baptized at the local parish church. With a baby and a toddler to look after, Carol's hands were full. She filled her days taking Kate, who was known as Catherine until her university days, to play sessions at St. Peter's Church Hall in the village, while Pippa slept in the same silver cross carriage that Kate had used when she was a baby. Carol loved village life, and in her jeans and Wellingtons she fitted right in. She baked cakes for the village summer fete, got involved with the Christmas nativity plays, and helped out with refreshments at the mother and toddler groups she attended with her daughters. It was completely different from her old life jet-setting around the world, but she loved motherhood and the relaxed pace of village life. It was, therefore, with a degree of trepidation that in May 1984, for months after Kate's second birthday, the family packed up their belongings to leave for Jordan in the Middle East. Michael had been offered a transfer of 2.5 years to the capital, Amman. The salary was good, and although packing up their home would be an upheaval, the prospect of living somewhere else for a while appealed to both Michael and Carol, who both loved visiting new places. With Kate nearing nursery school age, Carol and Michael had already started thinking about her education. Bradfield, the Church of England primary school that was next door to their home, seemed the obvious choice, but having spoken to some of the local mothers, Carol had heard excellent things about St. Andrew's Pre-Prep in the nearby village of Pangbourne. It was a fee-paying nursery school with an outstanding prep school attached, and although money was tight for the couple, they knew they had Michael's trust fund to go toward their children's education. Before they left for Jordan, they met with the headmaster, Robert Aitchison, so that they could reserve a place for Kate. "I first met them in 1983 before they went abroad," he recalled. They had inquired about the school and I sent a prospectus out. They explained they were going away but wanted a place for when they returned. They wanted co-educational from the start. They are a lovely family, very solid, and Carol and Michael were the sort of parents we wanted at the school. They were very supportive and trusted us to get on with the job. Life in Armagh could not have been more different from Bradfield. The densely populated city, which is situated over 7 hills, is one of the largest in the world. It was an exciting and exotic destination with a long summer season, hot but dry, and the additional attraction of plenty of places to visit, including ancient ruins and the Red Sea. Michael had flown out ahead of Carol and the girls to find a house to rent, and within a few weeks he put a deposit down on a villa in the upscale neighborhood of Amuthaina in the western part of the city. Compared to their attractive red brick semi, the 2-story building was nothing grand, but there was an excellent nursery school nearby. The property, fully furnished and air-conditioned, came with a small garden with a swing where Kate and Pippa could play. The neighbors, Intisar and Nicholl and Nijme, remembered the Middleton family as friendly and kind. They were good people, said Mr. Nijme. I remember once when we were traveling to London and Michael saw us at the airport. He upgraded our tickets to first class. Michael was based at the airport and was in charge of 4 airplanes, a TriStar and 3 Boeing 757s, which flew direct from London to Armagh 4 times a week. Hannah Hashway, a sales agent for General British Airways who worked alongside Michael in Armagh, said that he was popular and quickly earned the respect of his team. I remember him well. He was distinguished and a man of integrity, and he stood out from all the other managers. He had a sharp personality. Michael used to deal with passengers, and as part of our business we dealt with each other on a daily basis. As a director he was flexible, and the employees liked him. Because the inbound flights arrived overnight, Michael worked nights. While he caught up on his sleep during the daytime, Carol and the girls would meet some of their new friends and go out for walks in the surrounding countryside. As soon as they had moved in, they bought a patio furniture set with a sun umbrella and an inflatable paddling pool for the small garden. Carol loved to sunbathe and read while the girls had their afternoon naps, and when the afternoon had cooled off, they often enjoyed tea outside together. The weekends were family time. Eager to explore and get to know the country, they visited the tourist attractions, including Petra and Jerash, to see the famous Roman ruins. A sociable couple, Michael and Carol wanted to make new friends and decided to join the British Club in the nearby Abdown neighborhood, where they met fellow expats and other employees at British Airways. An avid sportsman, Michael loved to keep fit and often played tennis. They had soon created a circle of friends, and because they enjoyed entertaining, they hosted regular garden and dinner parties at their home. Carol was known to cook splendid 3-course meals, and sometimes there would be up to 30 friends gathered in their dining room. Kate, who was about to turn 3, was allowed to stay up until dinner was served, a treat she always enjoyed. Mr. Hashway was often invited. They frequently threw dinner parties and invited me and my wife and our employees. We would be around 17 couples and the food was homemade. Kate was little and she was like a butterfly. We used to see her at dinner parties. She accepted people and she was sociable. By her 3rd birthday, Kate was enrolled in Asahira, a local nursery school just a short walk from their home and run by a local teacher, Sahira Al-Nabulsi. It was brand new, built only 2 years before, and was the most expensive nursery for 3 to 5-year-olds in the district. Carol dropped Kate off in the mornings, and Michael would often collect her in the company car in the afternoon. Her father used to pick her up in his work uniform, and the kids used to get excited and run to see him, said Mrs. Ulnabolsey. Kate had a multicultural start to her preschool life. There were children from all over the world, and though some of her new friends were British, she also mixed with Japanese, Indonesian, and American children and was taught by British and Jordanian teachers in Arabic and English. The children learned Arabic and listened to passages from the Quran. The morning routine included having all the children sitting in a circle where they would all sing Incy Wincy Spider both in English and Arabic, said Mrs. Ulnabolsey. We would also read one short verse from the Quran to improve their Arabic and tell stories about the Prophet's companions, like Omar bin Khattab. The idea was to reinforce concepts such as respect and love. The teachers used to ask in Arabic, "Who is wearing red today?" so that children then would recognize the colors. Each morning at 9:30 a.m., Kate and her friends would have a traditional Jordanian breakfast of hummus, cheese, and labneh, a condensed yogurt similar to spreadable cheese, which was accompanied by olive oil and thyme and served on a fish-shaped plastic plate. We taught them table manners, said Mrs. Ulnabolsey. Each of them would take a sandwich and then pass the plate to the other. They also had a snack of apples, carrot sticks, and green peppers as well as crackers, salty sticks, and biscuits, known as Mary biscuits. With an emphasis on play, the children were encouraged to use the designated sandbox and areas set aside for painting, and to Kate's delight, there was a costume wardrobe. By the time she was 4, she had already developed a feel for the stage and enjoyed the plays the nursery staged each term. Kate loved to dress up and took part in a fashion show in which the children dressed in different Arabic costumes that represented the Middle Eastern countries. There was a playhouse with small wooden toy beds, and according to Mrs. Ulnabolsey, another of Kate's favorite games was to pretend to have tea parties. She also loved to paint, and twice a month the nursery arranged visits to the local bird zoo and to the nearby markets, where the children held onto a beaded rope and walked in a line so they didn't get lost. At Christmas, the children were encouraged to dress up and act out scenes from the Nativity, and Mrs. Ulnabolsey dressed as Santa Claus. They also learned about Ramadan and other significant observations in the Islamic calendar. Living in a different country and becoming part of the local community, getting to know a different way of life, the 2.5 years in Jordan were some of the happiest years of Michael and Carol's lives, but in the summer of 1986, Michael's transfer came to an end. And so, the adventure over, Carol, Michael, Kate, and Pippa returned home.